everyone, and welcome to our Coping Well During COVID series. Welcome back for those of you who have joined us before, and if it's your first time, I hope you find today's webinar really useful. Today we're going to be looking at managing worry and fear. We're going to be thinking a bit about anxiety and worry today. My name is Emily Gardner and I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist working for the NHS in London, and I'm trained to deliver specialised therapy for adults with anxiety and depression. Before we get started, I really want you to have a go at trying out the Q&A function, as we're going to be using this throughout today's webinar to make it as interactive as possible. So to start with, if you have a look up in the top right hand corner of your screen, you will find the box with the question mark for Q&A. So if you click on this, then the Q&A chat will come up, and it will give you the option to enter your name, but our preference is that you click on the small box by the blue arrow to remain anonymous. And the reason for this is so that we can keep your details confidential throughout the webinar today. And then it will give you the opportunity to enter your question, and then you just click on the arrow to send. So that's how the Q&A works. So if I ask a question during the webinar, I'd like you to respond using this chat. If I ask you to respond to a poll, we're going to put the options in the chat, and they will be there for you to like, so by clicking on the thumbs up button as well. If you have a question for me or for the moderators, then please type that question into the box as well. Everything you write will not be published immediately because it does need to be approved by a moderator, and so it may take a few moments to appear. And we may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we will use them for future reference as we develop the webinars. If you wish to speak to one of our moderators privately, then please put private at the beginning of your question or comment, and they will respond to you privately, and that won't be published publicly. Okay, so let's have a go at using this now. So we'd really like to know a little bit about why you're here and about your role. So some of you may be here for yourself. Some of you may be here to learn how to support a family member or friend who is struggling, or maybe you're here in a professional role. So please tell us why you're here. And so if you go over to the Q&A now, these options will be in the chat. So if you go over and like the one that applies to you, and I will come back to your responses in just a few moments. So we have had a think about how the coronavirus has been impacting people and their general well-being. And so we thought about developing a series of webinars to help you to cope with the impact caused by the coronavirus. And the theme of these webinars is different every week, and we're focusing on all the different ways that your mental health may have been affected. And in each of these webinars, the first step is in understanding why your mood has been impacted in the way that it has, followed by some useful strategies to help you to manage the way that you feel. So let's have a look at your responses. Let's see who you're here for. So it's just loading. I'm just going to have a quick look now. I can see that most of you are here for yourself. Brilliant. So hopefully today you will go away with some really practical strategies that you can apply to your own well-being, and specifically for today, your worries and anxieties. So another question, what do you hope to get out of this webinar? So you may have thought about this when you signed up, but just it'd be interesting for us to hear from you what you're hoping to gain from today's webinar and what you want to learn. So if you go across to the Q&A now and add that to the question box, and I'll come back to your responses shortly. So this series of webinars is designed to provide you with a toolkit of evidence-based resources, ideas and tools, with the hope that this toolkit will help you to manage over the next few days, weeks and months. All of the content of these webinars is based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a very effective treatment for depression as well as anxiety. And the focus of cognitive behavioural therapy is making changes to our behaviour as well as our thought processes to improve the way that we feel. Today's webinar, you will hopefully leave with a really good understanding of excessive worry and how worry can be maintained, as well as the links between our thoughts, physical sensations, our behaviours and our mood. And really want you to go away with some techniques which you can use to reduce your own anxiety and worry. So let's have a look at what you do hope to gain from today's webinar. So I'll just come across to your responses now. So manage anxiety day to day, some strategies to use and help my partner understand anxiety more. Lovely. So for one of you, it's thinking about your own anxiety day to day, managing that. And then for someone else, it's about learning strategies to help someone. An understanding of what this anxiety looks like and how to help others, and also preventative for myself, as I have previously struggled and seem to be okay currently. I think that's a really sensible idea. If you've experienced anxiety in the past, it can be really useful to learn the warning signs for yourself and start to put things in place, as you say, as a preventative. So even though you're not feeling too anxious right now, it's still useful to make sure you're doing all the right things. How to manage the worry and feeling of failure when working from home. Absolutely. So kind of managing how that feels to work from home and how having more worries is feeling for you. Strategies to help colleagues and friends coping with this situation. Practical tips to manage fears. To get strategies and also to manage worries related to COVID and going back to seeing patients face to face rather than remotely, and managing risks and worry as I'm currently helping my father care for my mother. Absolutely. So, you know, a lot of change coming up. You know, we've kind of got used to how things are right now. And so it's understandable that we would be feeling anxious about things returning to normal when they don't feel quite normal yet. So it's kind of like a limbo. We are looking forward to things changing and going back to normal, but we have these reservations and anxieties about it as well. Lovely. Well, thank you so much for your responses. I'll continue with the next part of the webinar now, and hopefully you will gain all of those things from today's webinar. So before we continue, I just wanted to kind of highlight that it has been a really difficult year, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster journey for all of us. And things have definitely felt uncertain and unpredictable at times. And you may have felt at times like you've had little control over things, because we have had little control. Lots of decisions have been made for us. Things like remote working, that was a choice that was thrown upon many of us, and we didn't have much say in the matter. For many of us, that may have been a good thing, but also brings with it some anxieties. Likewise, with going back to work, we may feel like we don't have a lot of choice about returning to face-to-face working, and we may feel quite scared and anxious about that. And we may find that we're starting to worry a lot more about things returning to normal. And you may find, or may have found in the past few weeks or months, that you felt fine one minute, but then the next you felt suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. And this is quite normal and to be expected, because it has been a really challenging time. We've had to make so many changes to prevent the spread of this virus, and these changes have been necessary for our physical health. But actually they do have a consequence on our mental health. And so it's important to recognise that and to acknowledge that it's okay if you're not feeling okay. It's okay to struggle right now. It's normal and to be expected. And some of you may be struggling right now and feel like you have nowhere to turn. And whilst this webinar is intended to help you and be educational, we also want you to know where to turn if you feel like you need immediate support. So if you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself in any way, then we really encourage you to reach out and talk to someone. Don't struggle alone. And the Samaritans are here to listen at any time of day or night, and you can talk to them about anything that's troubling you. And the number to call them is 116 123, and that's completely free. And we will provide more information about getting further support at the end of the webinar. And you can find this information and this number at the very top of the Q&A. So if you scroll right to the top, it's the first published announcement. So if you need this number at any point, it'll be there for you. So I just want to talk a little bit about anxiety, and it's really important to acknowledge that many people experience anxiety, and the symptoms of anxiety can make you feel concerned about whether there is something wrong with you. So symptoms such as an increased heart rate, breathlessness, feeling hot and sweaty, pins and needles, maybe that knot in your stomach. These are really common symptoms of anxiety, and these are just some of the symptoms. And although you may feel alone in your struggle with anxiety, it's actually really common. Many people experience anxiety on a regular basis. It's estimated that 1 in 5 people experience excessive levels of anxiety in their life. It can affect anyone at any stage because it's a survival instinct that has been designed to protect us from danger. We call it the fight or flight response, and it has protected us for thousands of years and has been passed down through our ancestors. So if we think back to when our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, they would be faced with the daily threat of a ferocious animal such as this lion drinking from their watering hole. And when faced with this kind of danger, this response is essential because it initiates a whole series of physical and behavioural changes that protects us from that danger. So when we are confronted with that danger, we typically flee or stand and fight. And the main purpose of this response, this fight or flight response, is to protect us. So it's about getting us ready to fight or flee from that danger. So whilst it can feel really distressing, it's not harmful in any way. It's actually there to keep us safe. As soon as the danger is perceived, the brain sends a message to our autonomic nervous system, which then activates various areas of our body to be ready for action. And because of that, we will experience lots of different changes from head to toe. So you may notice an increase in heart rate, because this is to ensure that blood is pumped around the body faster so that oxygen is delivered as quickly as possible to where it is needed. And whilst blood and oxygen is being sent to where it's needed, such as the large organs and muscles, it's also being taken away from places where it isn't needed. So your skin, your fingers, your toes. And this can result in your skin looking pale, you feeling cold, feeling numb and tingling in your fingers and toes. You may also notice changes to your breathing, and this is very important as it's providing your organs and your body with that extra oxygen that is required. But it can create feelings of breathlessness or choking or smothering or even tightness in your chest. One of the main side effects of that increased breathing is that the blood supply to the head is actually decreased, and that can produce symptoms of dizziness, lightheadedness, and even blurred vision. So there is often a reason for many of these physical symptoms that you experience. And it's really important to recognise that anxiety is a healthy bodily response to threat, and it makes sense when there is a clear threat, and it's a helpful response in order for us to react quickly to danger. So, for example, if a car pulls out of a junction, which we hadn't previously seen, it's really important that this response kicks in as quickly as possible so that we can jump out of the way and be safe. And then once that threat is gone, our body physiologically returns to normal quite quickly. But in our modern day world, the threats aren't always the same. They're not as obvious. So often the fight and flight response can be triggered by everyday things where there's no obvious threat. So, for example, we may find that we suddenly break out in a sweat at our desk whilst reading an email, or maybe while watching the news, or perhaps we've opened a letter that we'd originally thought was a bill. And that can kind of take us off guard, and it might not often make sense if we're not in an obviously dangerous situation. So it's important to recognise that how we feel physically, our behaviours, our emotions and our thoughts all interact with each other. And so what we have here is a common cycle, what we call a 5 areas model, which helps us to understand and break down what's going on when we feel a particular way. And it can be helpful to use this to understand our mood a bit better and understand what's driving it as well. So what I've created here is a common fear cycle that many of you may have experienced in the last year. And it's just to demonstrate how this cycle can work. And so we have at the top different life events that within the last year that may have contributed to you feeling the way you feel. So lockdown, a family member being unwell, being furloughed, not being able to work, children being unable to go to school, your own finances. So these are things that generally happen to us. And within the last year, a lot of that has been out of our control. And then naturally, we will have thoughts as a result. We interpret these life events and situations in a certain way. So initially, you may have been worrying about catching the virus or your loved ones catching the virus. But since then, your thoughts may have evolved to worrying about the impact of juggling, looking after your children and working from home, or maybe worrying about your finances. And perhaps now you're starting to worry about returning to the office after a year of remote working. Or maybe you're just worrying about how things will look in the future or how different things will be and the impact that might have on you or your career or your life situation. Naturally, all of these thoughts are quite distressing and they will have a knock-on effect on how we feel. Of course, if we're worrying that we might not be able to pay our rent or mortgage, that's quite a scary thought. So we're going to feel fearful about what that means. And then how we feel has a knock-on effect on what we do. So we may find that we're spending a lot of our time worrying about that. And with worry, it's almost like it can snowball out of control. So just one worry can spiral into lots of different worries. And you may find that in order to cope with the challenges that you're faced with, you may be drinking more alcohol, and that in itself can lead to an increase in physical symptoms. As well as our thoughts and our behaviours having a knock-on effect on how we feel physically. And as a result, you may have noticed that you often feel hot and sweaty, your heart racing, more breathless, and finding it difficult to sleep at night, or maybe you're restless a lot as well. Also, an interesting cycle that you may have noticed over the last year is being quite aware of breathlessness. Breathlessness is also a symptom of the virus, but it's a common symptom of anxiety. So you may have found yourself feeling anxious when you are noticing you're more breathless, and that may have made you worried that you have the virus. And that is more likely to make you monitor your body for symptoms or Google symptoms, which will then make you feel more anxious, which will increase that physical reaction. So you're going to be more breathless, which will reinforce that belief that you do have the virus. So on the whole, this cycle can make us feel really overwhelmed, and it can feel really difficult to break this cycle. So what we're going to think about today is how we can break into this vicious cycle, and what we're going to really focus on is the worry part of it and how we can manage worry. So what are some of the things that you are worrying about? So maybe think about the last couple of weeks and just consider some of the worries that you've had recently, and just add them to the Q&A now, and I'll come back to that in a few moments. So whilst you're thinking about your worries, I want to explain a little bit about what worry actually is. So worry is a mental process which is future focused. So it generally is about things that haven't happened yet. And we can also worry to problem solve and think about possible obstacles, ways around it, and plan solutions. And this process can be really helpful when there's a problem we're actually trying to solve. It's important to recognise that the process of worrying is actually a normal part of life, and it's something that everyone will do every now and again. However, it can become a problem when we're finding that it's taking up a lot of our time, or starting to have an impact on our ability to get on with our lives. And we may at times start to feel like the worry is in control of us. So what we can look to do is not to completely eradicate worry, because as we've already highlighted that, you know, it's quite normal and everyone does experience it from time to time. But instead, what we're trying to do is learn ways to manage it. And we can start to feel more in control of our worry if we learn to manage that process of worry. And as a result, if we're breaking into that vicious cycle that I've just talked about, we can see the other symptoms start to improve as a result. So a reduction of those physiological symptoms. So as I mentioned, 1 in 5 people do experience excessive levels of worry. And it's quite normal that when life presents us with quite a lot of uncertainty, that we would naturally start worrying about this, especially when we feel like we have very little control. But if we do notice that our worry is starting to become excessive, we may notice some of these other physiological symptoms, so muscle tension, aches and pains, restlessness and an inability to relax, difficulty concentrating. It may be impacting our sleep, and it may be that we're feeling really fatigued and demoralised in general. So it's at this point where we really need to start thinking about doing something about our worry and managing it. And there is a difference between worry and rumination, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So our worries generally are future focused, around danger, and often about our own ability to cope with things. Whereas rumination tends to be past focused, focused on loss and our own personal failings, so things that we have done, mistakes we've made. Worry tends to lead to anxiety, stress and fear, whereas rumination will more often lead to depression, sadness or even shame. Worry tends to be what if type questions, or imagining the worst case scenarios, whereas rumination is often dwelling, thinking if only I'd done this, and feeling that regret, wondering how things would have been if you'd have done things differently. So we will come on to how we deal with both worry and rumination shortly. But I just want to have a look at some of the things that you have been worrying about. And so I'll just have a look now at your responses. Having to go back into the office. Yeah, so that one's come up a few times. That's quite an understandable worry and fear at the moment, and the impact that's going to have things going back to normal and what that might be. And the effects of the vaccine. So it may be that you're worried about that. Maybe you haven't had it, maybe you've had it and you're having a reaction, or worried about having a reaction. Worried about giving my mother and father the virus. So yeah, the fear of the of passing it on, especially if you're working in a setting where you feel like you might easily get it, and then fear passing it on. That my vulnerable mum will get COVID, my nan already got it and passed away. Absolutely, so many of us have experienced loss over this last year, and that naturally and understandably will be making us concerned and worried about other people also getting the virus and the impact that will have on them. Family health, keeping engaged with work, what will it be like going out again, the future in general. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know how things are going to look or be when things start to go back to normal. And there's a lot of uncertainty still. Not being able to live near daughter when retire and financial difficulties. Yeah, so lots of future-based things that we're worrying about. Losing my job and not being able to let my children return to their clubs, holiday, etc. Absolutely. I'm not sure whether that is because you've lost your job or you're worrying about losing your job. Obviously you will know, but if it's about that you've lost your job or a fear of potentially losing your job, we will deal with those different types of worry today. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what that looks like. So hopefully that will help you kind of get your head around some of those worries. Okay, I can see there's quite a few more responses, so thank you. We unfortunately don't have the time to go through all of them right now, but have a read through each other's, and if they feel relevant to you, then press the thumbs up button, just to kind of share, I guess, with each other that has been a struggle for you as well. Okay, so we can think a bit about our worries like a bubble machine. So when we use a bubble machine, hundreds of bubbles will get fired out in all different directions until they're surrounding us. And if we chose to, we could address each individual bubble and pop that one individually. But whilst we're doing that, more bubbles are being generated, and often at a faster rate than we can pop them all. So if we want to kind of get rid of all the bubbles, what we need to do is to turn off the machine. And worry is very similar. We could spend a lot of our time dealing with each individual worry, but often the worry process will just keep going and creating more and more worries. So what we need to do is turn off that worry process rather than deal with our individual worries. So what we've got here is a common cycle with worry. So we've talked a bit about this cycle before, but as you can see, we've got those physical symptoms, those common thoughts and worries that we might have, and those common behaviours. And we've highlighted that it's really the worrying part that we need to tackle. Yes, there are other things that do contribute to this process of anxiety, but we can start with tackling that process of worry. And if we do that, we can break into this cycle. So our starting point in tackling our worries is recording them. So we need to start by keeping a record of our worries. And so what we have here is a worry diary. So we have the day and time, the situation. So where were you? What was happening? Are you with anyone? And then the content of that worrisome thought. So what were you thinking about? What were you worrying about? And then your anxiety rating out of 10. And then finally, a column for whether or not it's practical or hypothetical, which I'll talk about in a few moments. So I've got an example here just to show you how to use this worry diary, but I do really encourage that you get into a habit of starting to record and write down your worries, and we will be using this in our techniques in the future. So we have two different types of worries. We have practical worries that we can act on, and we also have hypothetical worries that we cannot do anything about. So if we think about practical worries, they're things that are actual problems, they're current problems, difficulties that we're faced with, which do require some kind of action. So some examples of practical worries: I have a cough, so I actually have a cough. This could be the coronavirus. Or my performance at work has decreased. I have been furloughed, but it's not enough. Financially, it's not enough. I'm unable to pay my rent, mortgage. My child's school is reopening. Do I send her back? Or even a family member is struggling financially. So all of these are examples of really practical worries, things that we can do something about. Whereas hypothetical worries are potential problems or future circumstances where there's no current solution, there's no current resolution because they haven't happened yet, and any number of scenarios could actually happen. And hypothetical worries are often what if type thoughts about the future. And what's interesting is that people who worry a lot often find that they have quite a lot of hypothetical worries. And it can be really difficult to put these thoughts out of our minds. And that can then make acting on our more practical worries quite difficult. And rumination, when we're thinking about categorizing rumination, we would deal with it we would deal with it in the same way as hypothetical worry, because it's in the past and we cannot change something that has already happened. And one of the main problems is that people tend to treat all of their worries in the same way. So, for example, if we think through and try to solve all of our hypothetical worries, then we're going to be left feeling frustrated, as there's often nothing we can do about them because they haven't happened. And then we don't feel like we have the time or confidence to actually act on our more practical worries that we could do something about. So we can often feel frozen and feel like we're just controlled by our worry and unable to act and do something about it. So here we have some space for you to write your own worries down and work out whether they are practical or hypothetical worries. And this can be a really helpful exercise, as starting to think about the different types of worry will help you to start thinking about what you can do to deal with them and how you might treat them in a different way. So we can use a worry tree to help us to work out what to do with our different types of worries. So as I've already mentioned, we start by writing down your worry and then ask ourselves this really important question: can I do something about this right now? If the answer is yes, then it is a practical worry. And the best way to deal with a practical worry is to resolve the problem. And we can do this by using a strategy called problem solving, which I'm going to talk about in a few moments. If the answer is no, then that means that it's a hypothetical worry, and that means that that worry may or may not happen, and there's nothing that you can do about it right now. So I guess essentially there's no point in worrying about it because you can't do anything about it, you can't change it, and it may not even happen. So what is the point in worrying? And we can use a strategy called worry time to help us let go of these kind of worries. It is important to recognise that hypothetical worries may still be really difficult thoughts, and they are real life worries, and they are often, reasonable to feel anxious about. But the distinction we need to make is whether or not we can actually do anything about that worry at that moment. If we cannot, then it's hypothetical, and continuing to go over it and over it is only making us feel more anxious. And sometimes there is an overlap between our worries. So, for example, there might be a situation that we can do something about, but we're worrying about it at a time when we can't do anything. So, for example, in the middle of the night when we're trying to sleep. So therefore, we can acknowledge that it's a practical problem, but right now there's not currently anything we can do about it. So we need to let it go and put it aside. So we deal with it in the same way that we would a hypothetical worry. Okay, so how do we use this problem solving strategy? So when we are feeling anxious, our ability to solve our practical problems can be hindered, and we can often feel frozen or fearful about acting on some of our problems, or we may even avoid thinking about some of the more difficult ones. And avoiding it may help us relieve that anxiety in the short term because we don't actually have to face it right now, but it keeps it there hanging over our heads, and in the long term it feeds into that anxiety cycle. So by using this problem solving technique, we can get some clarity on our problems, and it will give us our options and give us this opportunity to plan how to solve the problem and motivate change rather than avoidance. So the first thing that we need to do is to start by clearly identifying the problem. And it can be helpful to be really specific. So if it's a kind of general problem, then whittling it down into a number of specific problems. And then the second step is to brainstorm all of the possible solutions and try and write down everything that comes into your mind, no matter how ridiculous it may seem, or how, I guess, it may not necessarily be a feasible solution, but it's not about ruling it out at this stage. It's just getting those creative juices flowing. And the more ideas you allow, then you're more likely to think of really good solutions as well. And then step 3 is to have a look at the strengths and weaknesses. Once you've exhausted all of your possible solutions, you then have a look at each one and consider the strengths and weaknesses of each. And then once you've done that, you select the solution that you want to implement. But it's very important to remember that it's unlikely that there will be a perfect solution, and there will most likely be strengths and weaknesses for all of them. So what we're trying to do is look for the best possible solution from the ones that we have available. Because if we wait for the perfect solution, what we're actually doing is doing nothing. And this is a solution in and of itself. So if you were to add do nothing as a solution and weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of doing nothing, often doing nothing is not the best solution. But because we're waiting for the perfect solution, we end up doing nothing, and we don't actually want to do nothing. So it can be useful to add that in when you're doing this process. And then, as I said, once you've chosen your solution, you then plan how to carry out that solution, breaking it down into as many steps as possible, and really thinking about how to make it easy for you to actually carry out this solution, and really be kind to yourself in this process. And then put that plan into place. So do the steps that you planned and keep a note of how each step goes. And then step 7, it's really important that you review your progress, because it is likely that you won't necessarily resolve the problem on your first try. And so reviewing it gives us that opportunity to reflect on how it went, but also going back to step 2 and 3 and implement a new solution. Whereas often, if we do this all in our heads, we don't have these options to fall back on, and we can end up feeling really hopeless and frustrated. So going back to step 2 and 3 and implementing another solution, and we just keep going until we resolve the problem. And I have developed some examples of how to use problem solving for you to look at outside of the webinar today. And you'll find these at the end of the slides. So these slides you'll be able to access on the Thrive London website. So you'll be able to have a look through both of these examples just to give you an idea of how to use this strategy. So coming back to our worry tree, we've talked about the practical side of our worry tree. Now thinking a bit more about the hypothetical side. So as I mentioned, if it's a hypothetical worry, the best thing that we can do with those kinds of worry is let them go. But that's easier said than done, especially if we are naturally worriers. And so we use a strategy called worry time, which I'm going to talk you through now. So before we do that, I want you to try an experiment with me. And for the next few moments, I do not want you to think about a pink elephant. I have a picture here of a pink albino baby elephant, and it is extremely rare and cute, but I don't want you to think about it for the next few moments. Okay, how's that going for you? So many of you may have found that you actually were not able to not think about the pink elephant, and that is because suppressing our worries does not work. And this is unfortunately what we do tend to do to try and deal with our hypothetical worries. We tell ourselves not to worry about them, and we try to push the worry aside. However, as we've just seen, this is not a very effective strategy, and the more we try not to think about something, the more we get that bounce back effect, and that worry just keeps coming back into our mind. So what is the alternative? Well, for hypothetical worries, we use worry time to postpone our worries rather than just pushing them away. And postponing worry means that it's okay for that initial worrying thought to be in your mind. So for example, you might have the thought, what if I fail my exam? But you choose to make a decision not to engage with that thought any further at that particular time. And by not engaging with that worrisome thought further means that you're not trying to anticipate the worst case or run through all those different scenarios and solutions related to your initial worry. So for example, that initial worry, what if I fail my exam? You're then not thinking about how much of a disaster it'll be or how much of a failure you'll be. You're then not dwelling on getting kicked off the course and then not being able to find a job. So you can see how quickly that initial worry can escalate and snowball into all of these other worries. Instead of doing that and engaging with that process, we stop after we have that initial worry, what if I fail my exam? And think, okay, this is hypothetical. There's no point in worrying about this, so I'm going to postpone my worry till later. And we postpone it until our worry time. So the idea is that during your worry time, you're allowed to worry as much as you like about any of your worries. So in order to have this, we need to plan a time for ourselves to worry about these things. And so it might be helpful to start by considering how long you feel is an acceptable period of time to worry. And at first you may feel that you need to set aside quite a lot of time as you're worrying so much at the moment. But over time, you won't need as much time the more you practice this technique. And this time where you're allowed to worry should be a time that you set aside for yourself to worry, and you're not supposed to do anything else during this time. So make sure that you turn off or get rid of any distractions as wherever possible. So to get the most out of your worry time, have it at the same time every day, ideally no longer than half an hour. It can be helpful to set a reminder for a start and finish time, and have it in a separate room that you can leave once you're done. So once you've planned your worry time, the idea is that outside of that worry time, whenever you notice that you are worrying, you write that worry down. And the first thing you need to do is to determine whether it's a hypothetical or practical worry. If it's a practical worry, then the best thing to do is to resolve it. So use the problem-solving strategy if you can. If it's hypothetical, then, as we've said, there's no point worrying about it. And so we write this worry down on our worry list, knowing that we are going to worry about it as much as we like during our planned worry time. And then step 3 is refocusing on the present moment. So whatever we were doing before that worry popped into our mind, we just need to refocus on that. So whether we're watching television, it's refocusing on what we're watching, or if we were reading an email, it's refocusing on the email. And then when it comes to your scheduled worry time, you worry as much as you like about all of your worries within that half an hour. So you go through your list of hypothetical worries one by one, and for each hypothetical worry, consider how you felt when you wrote the worry and also how you feel about it now. And perhaps ask yourself whether or not the thing you were worried about actually happened. And if it has, how did you deal with it if it did? And were there worries that now that you've come back to them, they're no longer a problem for you? It can be helpful to reflect on what it feels like to worry as much as you want for that period of time. And maybe you don't feel you need as much time as you've originally planned. And it can be helpful, if a worry is no longer an issue for you, is to cross it out or scribble it out. But most importantly, at the end of your worry time, get rid of your list. So either cross it out, screw it up, throw it away, whatever you want to do, get rid of it, because it's important to start each new day with a fresh list so that your worries don't carry over to the next day. So by setting time for our worries, we're gaining back control. So rather than letting our worries consume us every day, all day, we can enjoy the present moment and address the worries in that time that we have set. And this can reduce the overall time that we spend worrying. When we contain our worry to a specific worry time, what we're doing is teaching the brain that we don't need to worry throughout the day, as it doesn't actually serve us any beneficial purpose. And worry time will really help us to tolerate the unknown and uncertainties in life. Because what we're essentially doing is, when we have a hypothetical worry, we're saying, well, that may happen, but it may not happen. There's no point worrying about it. So I'm going to worry about it at my worry time. So you're accepting that there is a level of uncertainty, you're allowing that uncertainty, and then you're reflecting on it during your worry time. And often you will find that the thing you worried about didn't happen, and that things aren't as bad as you thought they were going to be. So we then learn that it's okay to allow a certain level of uncertainty in our lives. It can also allow us to gain perspective about our worries, because if it's no longer a worry by the time we address it, we can reflect on our earlier reaction. And if the same worry keeps coming up on subsequent days, we might not react as anxiously because we've already dealt with it before. We know how to deal with it. And over time, people tend to find that they start to feel desensitized to their worries, as they start to get bored of their worries, and that reaction can become quicker. So you start to think, oh, well, I don't need to worry about this. And it doesn't create that same emotional response when it does pop up, and you won't spend as much time dwelling on it. The more we practice this, the better we get at being able to put our hypothetical worries to one side. And this means that we may eventually be able to do this process without actually having to write our worries down. Just simply reminding ourselves that it's a hypothetical worry will be enough. But it will take time and it will take practice to get to that point. So be kind to yourself as you start to use this technique. It's not going to feel natural straight away as you're used to engaging with your worries. And this is a very different approach. So we highlighted earlier that we can deal with rumination in the same way that we deal with hypothetical worries. And the reason for this is because a lot of what we are worrying about or ruminating about has already happened, and there's often nothing that we can actually do about it. So there's no point in dwelling on it any further. However, some of the things that we might be ruminating about might be really difficult to let go of. So it may be worthwhile considering how helpful rumination is, and can you let go of some of that rumination? When we are ruminating, what we're trying to do is reduce the distress that we're experiencing, and we're trying to overcome a problem, a past problem. But what we end up doing is increasing and prolonging that distress and making the problem bigger in some cases. It can interfere with clear thinking, our daily activities, and our ability to cope. And it will often lead to unhelpful behaviours such as self-harm, drinking, drugs, or comfort eating, because we're trying to escape our thoughts or feel better about things. And the more we ruminate or worry, the stronger that habit becomes and the harder it is to change. So it's important to remember that the less we ruminate or worry, the weaker the habit becomes. So as we said, if we've recognised that it's something we can't do anything about, whether it's rumination or worry, if we can't do anything about it, there's not much point in worrying about it. So what can I do? The first thing we need to do is notice that your mind is going down that rumination or worry route. And then tell yourself that you don't have to think about that right now, and you can wait until you feel stronger. So you postpone it till your worry time. It's also important to remember that there's nothing you can do about thoughts popping into your mind, but you can choose not to focus on them. So how do we not focus on some of these really difficult thoughts or worries? Well, what we can do is do something that will take your attention away and help you to feel better. So ask yourself, what can I do right now that will help me feel better and might be actually effective for this current situation? What can I do that will take me one step in a more helpful direction rather than dwelling on things? Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the webinar today, and I just want you to go through some take-home messages. So just to think about what are the main points from today's webinar. Well, firstly, I just want you to remember that anxiety is inevitable. We're not trying to eradicate anxiety because it's normal. It's a healthy bodily reaction. It can be really helpful to write down our worries because it gets them out of our head. And once they're written down, they feel a bit more concrete and we can get some perspective on them. Categorize your worries into those hypothetical versus practical worries to help us start to think about dealing with our worries in a different way rather than always in that same way. Using problem solving can give us clarity on our problems and help us to work out what our options are. And finally, using worry time to postpone our worries rather than push them away can be a really helpful strategy for our hypothetical worries. So before we finish today's webinar, what I'd like you to do is to choose an idea from today's webinar that you're going to action over the next week. So whether it's recording your worries, categorizing your worries, having a go at problem solving, or trying out worry time. So if you go across to the poll in the Q&A chat now, like the option that you feel you would like to try over this next week. And it's a bit of a commitment to yourself to put these techniques into practice, because the most important thing about cognitive behavioural therapy is actually trying these techniques out for yourself in order to see an improvement in the way that you feel. Also, whilst you're doing that, if you do have any questions from today's webinar, then please add these to the Q&A now, as we'll spend a few moments at the end of the webinar going through your questions. So just before we get to that, I just want to highlight some other things that are in the slide, in your slides, which you can access on the Thrive London website. Here we have a blank copy of the 5 areas model that I talked about at the very beginning of the webinar, and it has some useful questions for each box just to help you to think about your own vicious cycles. We also have 2 problem solving examples. So we have a finance example for you to have a look through, as well as a childcare example. Now, neither of these examples may well apply to you, but the idea behind this is to just give you, I guess, some examples of how you could use this strategy and apply the problem solving technique to your own problems. We have quite a few more webinars planned over the next few weeks, so we'd love you to be able to come and join us for either the Tuesday or the Wednesday webinar. So next week we're starting to look at low mood and burnout. The following week we're going to be looking at sleep, and then the week after that we're going to be looking at mindfulness. And you can register for any of these webinars here using the link, which will be pasted into the Q&A chat. If you feel like you need further support and you don't quite feel like these webinars are enough and you want to talk to someone about some of the things you're struggling with, IAPT services are free NHS funded services across the UK, and they can offer treatment over the telephone or video at the moment. So if you feel like you or someone needs support for low mood or anxiety or sleep problems, then you can self-refer to your local IAPT service, and you can find your local IAPT service by using this link and typing in your postcode, and then you can self-refer. If you need urgent help for your mood, if you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself, then we really encourage you to reach out and talk to someone. Contact your GP if you feel able to, but if you don't feel able to wait for a doctor and you feel unable to cope right now, then any number of these organisations can get you support straight away. So the Samaritans are here at any time of day or night, and you can call them on 116 123. Alternatively, Shout offer a 24/7 crisis tech support, and so if you text Shout to 85258, you'll be able to get access to that support. And then finally, if you're not sure what help you need, then you can use this link and you will find the NHS urgent support guidance there. We have further links for resources and things that are available online here. So if you get a bit of time later, you can have a look through some of these resources to get you further support. And finally, we do really value your feedback, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about the webinar today. So using the link which we're going to paste into the Q&A chat, click on it and then spend a few moments just telling us how you found the webinar, as we really do value your feedback about how you found it, whether it's positive or negative, or any ideas for how we can improve the webinar. Please do share them with us. And that is the end of our webinar today. I really hope it's been helpful and hope that you've got some ideas to help you manage your anxiety and worry, and that you feel able to put some of those ideas into practice. So I'm going to have a look now at some of your, see if any of you have any questions. So let me scroll down to the bottom. Okay, so we have a question. How important is keeping positive, would you say? So this is a really interesting question. First of all, research has shown that optimists do better, function better in life than pessimists. So an optimist is more likely to put themselves forward for opportunity because they're confident and they feel positive about it, whereas pessimists are more likely to not do things or to avoid things because they don't feel like they're pessimistic about it, so they feel like they're not going to achieve it. So if we think about it in that way, being positive is more helpful. Obviously, you may still, you won't always be successful with every opportunity, but you're more likely to succeed if you're positive and optimistic. But with CBT, our approach isn't about being really, really positive about things. Because if you think about this last year, it hasn't been a really positive experience for many people. And so to say, oh, it's been a great year, fantastic, that's not actually true or accurate. So what we try and do in cognitive behavioural therapy is try and get a more balanced perspective and more accurate, well-rounded perspective. So rather than being pessimistic or negative and focusing on the negative about the last year, we're not focusing on the positive and how great it's been, because that's not accurate either. What we're focusing on is the realities and of how hard it's been, but also the benefits, because often we tend to have a mental filter where we only focus on the negative. So we do need to be open to positivity and on the good things. But what we encourage in cognitive behaviour therapy is a more balanced view. So, looking at reality. What is the reality and what is that balanced perspective, rather than being too positive or too negative. I hope that answers your question. I know it was a really quick answer, but hopefully that helps. And we are going to talk a bit more about low mood next week, so maybe that will help answer that question a bit more as well. How do you know when you should seek treatment for worrying? I guess think about how much time you're spending worrying. So if it's just, a couple of worries every so often each day, and it doesn't take up all of your time, then that's okay, that's quite normal. But if you're finding that you're obsessing about a lot of your worries and you're spending quite a lot of time engaged in worry, then it might be worthwhile thinking about whether or not you could get some support for your anxiety and worry. And as I said, you can refer to your local IAP service and they can tell you whether or not you need it as well. So they'll do an assessment. So they'll ask you a number of questions, do some questionnaires with you. And if they think you have a problem with worry, they would then offer that treatment to you. If they think actually it's just normal, you're managing okay at the moment, they would tell you that as well. So it's worthwhile looking into it if you feel it'd be useful. So that's all the time we have, all the questions we have time for now. Thank you for coming, and really hope you've got some techniques that you can try and put into practice and have a go at. As I mentioned at the very beginning, cognitive behavioural therapy is a very effective treatment if you put these techniques into practice. So have a go at them, try them out, and good luck. And hopefully we'll see you next week on our other webinars. Take care. Bye.